Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands. Here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire? Hail Namariknar, hail to the Margan, hail to the battle crow, hail to the raven goddess. Hail to you whose eyes see and whose wings soar. Hail to you who takes many forms, heifer, eel, raven, and crow, hag and maiden. Hail to you who guide and lead through darkness, over darkness, around darkness. You who show us the beauty in the darkness and the many sides of things. May we have perseverance. May we have courage. May we be true on our paths. May our mistakes be learned from and ultimately beneficial.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. Oh, this is episode 147 with my good friends and co-hosts, Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you both doing tonight?
I am good. I like the little exasperated side. I'm like,
I,
wow, we've really done this
I know I
many.
say this a lot, but it blows my mind that this is season 7 and this is episode 147. When I started doing this with Jim, I never thought we'd get this far or have gone this long, and I'm always grateful that we have yet another episode in the bag. And yeah, it it's honestly it's a this show is just a real delight, and just being able to sit down and have good conversations with people is, to me, that's what podcasting is all about. That's what having being around a digital grandfather fire is for. So I don't know, just feeling really happy and blessed about everything today. So how are you folks doing?
I'm
I'm good, yeah. Having a restful weekend here, and I did ritual earlier, and it's good,
you're
yeah.
good.
Sorry, Emily, how are you?
I'm doing decently well. Got like a little bit of a cold still hanging on. I'm trying to get rid of, but I'm drinking some tea to help out with that. It's been good but busy. I'm excited by all of the different like classes and stuff that people are putting out, and it's just a very, very busy time. What about you, Saranth?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the classes that I've been able to see. The upcoming convocations really exciting. Today specifically, I was on a live with Diana Rachel. She had a live on her Substack for targeted social justice magic, and it was fascinating. But had to cut my watching short. I'll have to catch it on the rebound for the recording. Um, and it's chock full of really good information about how to be very careful and targeted with your magic work and the things that you ask spirits to help you out with. And I thought it was excellent, and really looking forward to the classes at con, both the ones I'm putting on and the ones that I'm going to be sitting in on. So it's a lot of uh, exciting times ahead. So I'm looking forward to things. Um, I suppose the question that most comes to mind is, uh, are are there any projects that people are getting into at the moment, or are things kind of coasting from where we were last episode?
Yeah, I'm just kind of keeping on and resting, and
That is
that's where
nothing
I'm
wrong
at
with
here.
that.
Yeah.
Same. I feel like there's a lot of spirit work stuff I need to do. There's pack stuff. There's some heathen stuff. There's a lot of journey work that I need to do. But as far as projects, I think it's pretty much the same. Looking forward to the ancestor ritual that we're presenting at convocation. That's probably going to be at the top of my priority list, making sure everything is in place for that over the next couple weeks. What about you, Saranth?
Going through the workshops I'll be presenting both for convocation and for beginning in March after con. I'm going to be putting on a monthly workshop through my Humanitics profile. I've put that link on my website as well as on my portion of the Discord. And I'm really looking forward to that. One of the things that I've been doing for that that's been different, taking some of your advice, Emily, has been to put together presentation slides so people can actually like visually look at what I'm talking about as I'm going through the material. Because for the most part, what I've been doing up till now is uh, using an outline and talking. Because a lot of my workshops are experiential, like you do meditation work or you connect with a spirit as part of the workshop. And so I was like, well, I don't need slides for this because I'm just presenting and people are doing work. Well, turns out people actually do want slides, and those are really helpful for later on. So I'm finally taking advice and putting those together. So that's one of my big projects right now is just getting that done. But aside from that, I'm just trying to relax until convocation hits, and then vacation for the week of and then the week after because convocation's a working weekend.
Nice. Well, speaking of
Absolutely.
big projects, our guest for tonight got in touch with us to share her own big project. So
Absolutely. I've
shall we
been
bring her
really
on?
excited to have this guest on. Please go ahead.
Okay, so Niina Niskanen is a Finnish artist and folklorist known by her online name Fairychamber. She's a YouTuber and podcaster known for her illustrations and storytelling. She specializes in the portrayal of mythology and folklore in pop culture. So welcome around Grandfather Fire, Niina. Tervetuloa.
Thank you. Your Finnish is excellent.
Thank you. Kiitos. So what drew you to write this book on Sami
Like
mythology?
many good things in life, it started with ancestry research. So my mother's grandmother was a Sami. She was a Kemin Sami. And this is something that I've known my entire life. But it was maybe 10 years ago, my uncle started to do more in-depth family research, and he found out, oh, we have ancestry in the Lapland of Sweden and also in the Lapland of Finland. And then I started to do more deeper research. And just last month, I was able to trace my great grandmother's family to 1450 in northeastern Lapland, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
very impressive.
So that really started my interest to the Sami mythology about a decade ago, and to write more about it and study it. Yes.
So, what was the process of getting into this book like for you? Because some people they use the verbiage like "I have a book-shaped hole in me." Other folks will say, "I was called to write this." Was there a process like that for you?
It's really started pretty slowly, and doing lots of field work and speaking to some of the older members of the community. And I do have some Sami friends who are my age, but they don't really know that much about the myths and folklore. So then I had to reach out to some of the older folks who know a little more. But then here in Finland we have lots of books and studies published about Sami mythology, and also in Swedish as well. So there's lots of ways to research the topic. And my background is in Finnish folklore, which I've been studying for a pretty long time. And there is definitely lapping between the two, because they are both part of certain, how would I say, Arctic mythological patterns.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yes.
I mean, for those of us outside of Finland and outside of the kind of Scandinavia region and the Nordic region and the Arctic region, we don't seem to encounter Finnish or Sami myths or folklore much. So for those of us here, that's kind of interesting. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about how they compare to other things. How do they compare to maybe Norse mythology or Greek or Roman or
Yes. So I would say that Finnish and Sami, I think we should start with the language. So those two so there are many Sami languages, and they are related to Finnish because they are both Uralic languages, and the Uralic languages, they originate from the Ural Mountains from Siberia. So the languages are sort of distant relatives. So there are some words that are similar, then there are others that are quite different. And in Finland, there are 3 Sami languages that are being spoken. There's more in Norway and Sweden. And the language that my great-grandmother's family line spoke, Kemin Sami, unfortunately, the language vanished in the 19th century, probably because of so-called Finnification project that was going on back then, and where the Samis were forced to speak Finnish. So there's now a project going on where there are some linguistics that are trying to bring the language back and deconstruct it. So I will see how it's going to go. But maybe different to the Scandinavian Norse mythology, I think Finnish and Sami mythology, there's lots of, I would say it's very animistic, it's very shamanistic. There's worship of ancestors, worship of animals, different nature phenomenons. The difference between the Sami and the Finnish myths is probably that the Sami culture was always a hunting culture, whereas Finland was a hunting culture, but also agriculture, which wasn't practiced by the Sami. So that's a big difference. With the Sami, a lot of the mythology is based on their ways of living, which was mainly hunting and fishing and reindeer herding. So lots of their deities were gods and goddesses related to reindeers and hunting.
So, out of curiosity, as you're kind of doing this research and in the process of writing this book, were there many things that you decided not to put in the book?
Mostly I just added the things from the folklore and mythology. I didn't write that much about the politics because I'm not that familiar with it, but
Right.
there's a bit of that, not much. But it's mostly about the mythology and
Yeah,
folklore.
Mhm.
So when it came to getting down to the folklore and what to include, was there a process that you went through internally with the elders you were able to talk with? What did that process look like, if you don't mind talking about that?
There are certain concepts that are very, a big part of Sami culture, and that I wanted to include, like Seitas and the concept of the soul, and the different ways of seeing the world. Certain main topics that I wrote down that I want to include, and then look around things that are related to that. And the Sami mythology and folklore, it was mainly passed on orally. So a lot of the text, the earlier texts are really written by Christian missionaries. So one needs to be quite careful when reading the different descriptions of the underworld or reincarnation and whatnot.
Did you find then that there was a big barrier because of the kind of history with the Finnification and then the even longer history of a kind of Christianization there? Did that make writing the book harder?
I'd say yes and no. I think a lot of the study that I've been doing about the Finnification, I just started to do that after I had finished the book. But it had to do with sort of studying my grandmother's ancestry and where she came from. There was a very long history between mixed marriages between like Finns and the Sami. So I think that's part of the maybe non-intentional Finnification, but it was still part of it, you know. But also there were like children were forbidden to speak Sami in schools, and they were punished for it. And at some point, if I make some readjustments for the book, I might add some of that there. But sadly, as we know, these kind of things have happened with indigenous people around the world.
Yeah, I was listening to what you were saying, and I was immediately reminded of the residential schools here in the States and Canada. And sad to see that colonialism acts the same worldwide. I mean, it's colonialism. It's violent, and you'd think that when you hear these stories often enough that you're not shocked anymore, but it's just still it's a gut punch and a punch in the heart. And I appreciate you sharing that pain and appreciate you being willing to talk about it, because I can understand that that's a very hard thing to talk about, let alone give voice to.
Yes, and here in Finland, I would say that it's only been within the last maybe 20 years, there's been like a more talk about cultural appropriation and things like that. And we still don't have like stories in school books about the Sami, which is pretty crazy. But I think it was maybe 2006 or something, 2010. Finnish Lutheran Church actually asked forgiveness, apologized for the Sami for burning the shaman drums hundreds of years ago. A little bit too late, but still a nice gesture. It's more than the government has done. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So there were,
Yeah, it
there were
seems.
massive burnings of the shaman drums in Finland and in Sweden back in the days.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen photos from northern Norway and Sweden of kind of Sami children in schools and being forced to speak Norwegian and Swedish. So it sounds like kind of similar was happening in Finland.
When this happened in Finland, there was a big wave of nationalism because Finland became an independent country like in the beginning of the 21st century, but I think the nationalism also had a big part of it, the Finnification process. Yeah.
It seems in recent years the Sami flag seems more prevalent as well. I seem to see the Sami flag around a lot more online these days.
Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do you think that's sort of part of this reassessing of Sami culture and discussing culture and the history of these things in Finland
Yes, I think
now?
there's a lot more Samis who are willing to discuss about things. And also, I've noticed that there are lots of people like myself who have like maybe third or fourth generation of like Sami that are reconnecting with their roots. And like I live in northern Finland, but I have noticed like a movement in like Helsinki area with Samis, people with Sami ancestry becoming more interested on their history. So I do see that kind of movement as well. But just with people who have like both parents are Sami, are like are, how would I say, getting their voice back. Maybe I should say it that way. Yes.
That is beautiful, powerful work. And if you don't mind me saying so, it sounds like this book is part of that process as well.
I hope so, because I've met people internationally and abroad who are quite interested on the Sami mythology, but one of the reasons why I wrote the book is because there isn't a lot of information about that in English, especially the Finnish Samis, Inari Sami and Kemin Sami, or like the smallest Sami groups here in Finland, and apparently they were the first ones who lived here. So I think I always tend to explore myths and folk tales of countries that are very less known. I'm currently writing a book about Baltic mythology. So I tend to like the less known areas.
I'm laughing because it sounds like you really like to do deep dives on niche topics that aren't as
Yes,
well explored,
absolutely.
and I definitely can feel that.
I mean, I could do something like Greek mythology or Norse mythology, but everybody knows that if they are interested in folklore or mythology in general,
hmm
and they're all great. The people know about them.
So it seems, yeah. Um, I know sort of here and in the States, it seems that a lot of people hear about Finnish and Sami traditional culture through things like the portrayal in sort of Disney's Frozen and things like that. Um, I don't know if in Finland the pop culture there has a lot more Sami sort of representation or things from Sami mythology and folklore. I was wondering if you could maybe sort of talk about that and how you feel that these things are being
I think it's
portrayed.
been quite negative in Finland, to be honest. A lot
Okay.
of the Samis, for example, in the 90s were portrayed to be like uh, drunks, and it's very quite offensive portrayal of the Sami that there was. I hope that we will get better ones in the future. Honestly, I think Frozen is one of the better ones. Uh, but yeah, I hope we will. I hope we are heading to a better direction. I don't know how it is in Sweden and in Norway. I know that in Norway there's a lot more Samis than there are in Finland, because in Finland it's like 10,000, and then in Norway it's 40 to 50,000. So there's a lot more Sami culture there. So it might just be like the culture is so small, and then I think in Finland there is, I would say, I'd say invisible racism that's going on, that makes things a little difficult. And there's also been turmoil between the different Sami groups in Finland, but it has more to do with the politics. Like, I think now they announced a new law recently that only people who can vote in the Sami parliament are those whose parents or grandparents speaks a Sami language. But then my ancestries, or the Kemin Sami in Finland, there's like 2,000 of them. Nobody speaks the language because the language vanished. So they cannot vote anymore. It's crazy.
Wow.
But I've heard that it's actually more of a political theme that's going on there. So I don't know that much about it.
Because I know when people often think of mythology and pop culture, or even sort of indigenous folklore and pop culture, there's a lot of examples to point to for Greek and Norse mythology, and there are lots of examples to point to for kind of indigenous American representation in pop culture. So I suppose in your ideal world, what would you like to see for sort of Sami representation or Sami folklore in pop culture?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I would like to see more positive stories about the Sami folktales and mythology. Maybe they could be used as a inspiration for films and TV shows. I think in Finland we don't do enough with our folk tales when it comes to like pop culture. We could do a lot more than like horror movies, but maybe we will get into that. Like my mind goes to Sweden and Astrid Lindgren because she used lots of Swedish folk tales in her stories. There are some in Moomins, like elements of folklore. Those are mostly, yeah, in children's media we do find some things.
And obviously I'm sort of viewing it as an
Yes.
outsider, but I kind of get the impression looking at the Moomins that where there might be sort of Sami or Finnish folklore in there, it's kind of in this fantasy world of Moominland anyways, so it's maybe hard to kind of differentiate and spot it.
I think if you are a Finn, you might notice that, especially in the books, because like I just reread some of them, and there are some pagan elements in Moomin Midwinter because there's the ancestor worship, and also they make a bonfire on the winter when to celebrate the return of the sun, which is something that was done by both Finns and the Sami. Then in the Moomin Midsummer, I think they do spells during the summer solstice, which is something that a lot of Finns do, even though they say they don't do. It's quite funny.
I suppose kind of thinking about it, you also see them sort of stockpiling and gathering all their food for the winter. And then they all emerge when spring comes around, and they're all opening the curtains and cleaning and everything, which also feels very pagan.
Yes, I always get that sense from the Moomin books that there's almost like a pagan undertone behind them. Yeah.
There you go. We'll start telling everyone the Moomins are pagan.
Oh, I thought you said. I'm sorry. I thought you had something to say. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I thought Emily had something to say, so I thought I was jumping over both of you.
So with things like, I mean, Disney's Frozen seems to be the biggest thing in kind of the English speaking world. So when you see things in that, how accurate does that feel to Sami or Finnish mythology and
Well, I
folklore?
was actually quite surprised how accurate it was. I know that they had like group of Sami consults making the film or writing it. It's good when they are portraying indigenous people. There were a lot of things that I recognized. I don't know if anyone else recognized some of the Finnish parts, but when it comes to the Sami, like there's the Nordhutra tribe, and they worship the sun, and they are reindeer herders. They are based to the Sami, and I thought it was interesting how because they have, you know, Elsa's and Anna's mother is a Sami, and there was some Swedish king, a Viking king in the 18th century, who was married to a Sami woman, and I can't remember anyone's name now. But then I thought maybe they got their inspiration from there. I think it happened in Norway. It was a Norwegian Sami. Very possible. Um, I think I liked the most about the portrayal of the underworld or the land of the dead because it was very similar to the way it's portrayed in Finland and in Lapland. So in a lot of the Sami stories, the underworld or the world of the dead, it's somewhere uh, underwater or it's surrounded by water, and they call it Ahtohallan in the movies. And Ahti is the Finnish god of the sea, god of the depths, god of the ocean, god of the fish. So, and Ahtohalla means packed ice in Finnish. So that's interesting. And she travels there with a horse, the underworld. And in Finnish folk tales, there was a magical horse who was like a shamanistic messenger between the living and the dead. And, and I remember I was watching the movie. I was thinking about this. Oh, I know that story. It's familiar to me.
So the two that come to mind are Harald Fairhair or Haraldur Harfagri, as he's known in the sources, and also Eric Blothax, um, are both supposedly to have been at one point or another married to Sami women, and these women were purported to be very skilled in Seidr. And so that those kinds of ties, uh, the Sami as the continuous other, seems to be a thing that echoes within a lot of the Nordic sources that I'm familiar with, because you'd have things like going Finfara, like going afar to go learn magic from the Finns, um, uh, which was kind of their gloss for the Sami people that they were close to. Um, so a lot of that makes sense, and the I guess that's kind of the current danger, isn't it? Where the us as outsiders can there's this danger of exotification, of not listening to people in their own voices, right? Of saying, well, I know this history now because I know these stories. Like it's the danger of I got it from Frozen, so therefore I know I know what I'm talking about now. And it just strikes me as I'm hearing what you're talking about, and it's just so important as we dig into folklore and mythology, as it comes forward into pop culture, that it's from the voices of the people. I think that something you touched on earlier with Disney bringing on Sami consultants was a big deal, and it's something they historically didn't do. Uh, I think they started doing it for Frozen and Moana, and that very welcome, but that's very, very recent in Disney's history and Western media writ large. Um, and I just, books like these are such a lifeline, especially for those of us who don't speak the language and are outside of the culture, because unless we know somebody either through social media or personally who's in the culture, there's an entire world that we don't understand and don't grok, that we don't understand. And I guess the thing that really comes back to is like when it comes to communicating across these, what do you find the easiest and the hardest to communicate?
Well, I think some of the concepts can be a bit difficult to explain, but I think it's not just because of different like cultural differences, but also just like there are these concepts within shamanism that like a person who is maybe not so spiritually inclined that might struggle to understand, and in animism. And this is what we need to deal with when we study mythology and folklore, because when we go back thousands and thousands of years, then we at some point come across shamanism and animism. But I think those are some of the things that I sometimes struggle to put into words, how I explain this concept. But you get better at it when you do it more often. Like when it comes to, for example, the old worldview of the Sami, there are many different versions of it. There's the Christian version. There are several like shamanistic pagan versions, and it's a bit of a struggle to think, okay, which one of these came first? When did it change? How much was this influenced by the Vikings or other tribes, or those are the things that I struggle sometimes. And the thing is, even with the study, like you can read books about Samis from 100 years back and books written 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and a lot of it is still like we cannot know things for sure, because when it comes to folklore, one story that is told in one part of the country, it's told differently in another part. And there are new layers that are being added because that's the way folklore works.
I'm curious if you feel that creating this book, and both through the research and for putting it all together to publish, has brought you closer to your ancestors, or has shifted how you view or interact with them?
I think it's a little both. I think, well, these names might not mean to people who are not from this certain language area. But when I was doing this study of my ancestors and tracing back my great grandmother's family, and first we get people with last names to the 17th century, and then after that it's just single names, and someone is someone's son and someone's daughter. But there were at some point all the names turned from Finnish to Sami names, and they become more and more interesting. There was Jouka, Junga, Mielipäivä. Like we can recognize that these are all Sami names. That was quite interesting. And I've been even thinking about changing my name or getting myself another like extra name at some point, just because I thought it was so interesting. But I also like that they had written these things down like in the 15th century, and these were mostly like from tax collectors' books that we get these names, and also from church files, but mostly from tax collectors, because the Samis, they paid taxes for the King of Sweden, and it was usually furs and maybe some reindeer antlers, things like that. So in a way, these people were valuable for the king because they were hunters and very skilled hunters, and then they could get, things from them. And the area where my whole mother's whole family is from Kuusamo, which is in northeastern Lapland. The whole city, before it became a city, it was funded by the Sami. There was 2 large Sami villages there they were inhabited by the Kemin Sami all the way to the 17th century, and then there were Finnish forest workers that moved to the area. That's where we get all the mixed marriages. So there's quite a long history there. We still have a summer cabin in the area, and there are some Sami worshipping places there as well. It's pretty cool.
I noticed looking around your Instagram and your YouTube, you talked about creating art as feeling like a magical process. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that a little.
Well, it kind of it depends what I'm illustrating, but sometimes it does feel like there is some kind of magical process going on. I've noticed that when I get into this, artist mode, where I just paint, and it's like how do you say? You almost fall into a trance, or you are in a very meditative space. Because I usually just listen podcast on my headphones and I just paint for hours and hours. And it's like I think I started to do that in university, I activated that full mode to paint that way. So I think there is some kind of a greater power behind that. I don't know. Yes.
So has the research behind this book influenced or impacted your paintings at all?
I think when I first started to do the research, I was actually living in the UK. I was studying illustration. That's when my uncle was doing the family research for the first time. And I started to study Sami mythology. That's when I had maybe a couple of years. I painted lots of Sami goddesses and different animal spirits. It was very inspiring. And at the moment, I'm painting the Baltic gods and goddesses for my new book. But yeah, it was very inspiring to read all the stories. And that's when I heard many of them for the first time. There were some that I had heard as a child from my grandfather. And there were lots of there are some stories I can't say for sure are they Sami stories or are they Finnish stories, because they come from the same area, and maybe they are both, like the story of the Northern Lights and the Fire Fox. I've heard that in Finnish, and I've heard that being taught by the Samis. I think there's lots of intersections with a lot of stories, sort of Finnish, Sami, maybe also some from Estonia, certain Finno-Ugric tribes in Russia. So they all have layers that are very, very similar, especially when it comes to all these layers of storytelling. And back in the days in Finland, people used to worship bear as one of the gods. This was very common in all sort of Siberian cultures and pretty much all over Scandinavia. So those things are very interesting. You can find similar mythical patterns. Also, the sun goddess was something that I found from many cultures. Like sun was worshipped as as a female deity by the Sami, also by the Finns, so by the Balts, and also by the Norsemen. That was interesting because in most cultures, sun is portrayed as a male. So that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. The intersection there is deeply interesting to me. That's one of the things when Snow brought forward, hey, this is a guest. I'm like, oh, neat, because there's so many places where I see intersections, kind of maybe not in the foreground of the myths, but in some of the so looking back far enough, like you were saying, like where you relate to the animals as ancestors, or you relate to them as kin, whether the bear rituals or uh, the survivals in the heathen folklore, like for the berserkers or the Ulfhefnar, the wolf shirts. Um, and like you were mentioning with relating to natural phenomena like the sun and moon as goddess and god. Um, and they're certainly not one to one, but they're really interesting points of comparison to me as well. Not only because I'm a heathen, but because the the interplay of culture, of looking around you and how you're supposed to relate to things and what the order of things and the unfolding of mythology is really interesting to me. And how we relate to one another through these things. It's to me, noodling on these things is a really fascinating thing. So how we relate to things through folklore and religion and magic and myth and all of these things coming together, like in your book. Um, I appreciate that you're willing to talk about it. If for no other reason than because there's so many points of comparison and conversation, and so many points that because this is such an underexplored topic outside of the circles that you're traveling in. Because I mean, I happen to know people of Finnish descent who are trying to reconnect, but there's so little written about in English that aren't really expensive academic works that it can be really hard to access some of these stories. Excuse me.
Oh.
I'm curious, Niina, looking at your book, because for full disclosure, Niina was generous enough to send the co-hosts a free virtual copy of the book in preparation for the show. Looking at it, Niina, one of the names of the gods and goddesses that really stood out to me was Saraka. I don't know
Very
if I'm
good.
pronouncing that right. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about her a bit, because what you wrote in your book seemed really interesting
Yeah,
to me.
sure. So Saraka is part of a group of 3 goddesses, and she's the goddess of giving birth. She's the protector of girls and women. She has a sister, Juksakka, and she is the protector of boys and men, and hunting and skiing and wild animals. Then there's the 3rd goddess, and her name is Uksakka. She's the goddess of doors and gateways, and also protector of children. So these 3 sister goddesses, they are painted to the bottom of the shaman drum because they were believed to live underneath the kota, or the tent where the Samis lived. and their mother was Matterakka, the earth goddess. And the story goes that when the child was conceived, Radien, who was the god of the community, he would bring the spirit of the child to Matterakka, the earth goddess, and she would connect the child with the soul of the child with the body, and she would create the child this way. So the mother goddess and her 3 daughters and then the god of community are sort of work together and they create the children. And then these 3 sister goddesses, they protect the children and they protect the adults as well. And I thought Uksakka is really interesting because she protects doors and gateways. So when the child is inside a home or the house or the tent, she's protected by Uksakka. When she enters outside the home, she's protected by Uksakka in the yard. And then at some point, the child moves, becomes an adult, starts a family of their own. Then these goddesses protect their children now in return. So I just thought it was just lovely that there are these 3 goddesses who protect children. Though I think in lots of hunting cultures there tends to be lots of taboos when it comes to men and women. Not so much now in the current Sami communities, but back in the days when things were a little different. But also it kind of depends on the tribe. There were some Sami tribes where also women did fish and hunt together with the men, so it wasn't like certain things were forbidden from everybody. But there were some areas that were only reserved for women and others that were for men, like giving birth and things like that. Those were like areas for women. And I think there was an interesting goddess called Bosseakka. She was the protector of the shaman drum. So in the tent, there was an altar for Bosseakka and like a secret entry behind the altar, but only men were allowed to walk through that entry. And especially if they've been hunting and they had something that they brought home with them, like, I don't know, reindeer or hare or something. But that area was only for men. So I think it's interesting that there are these gods and goddesses for boys and girls in the mythology. And Yuksakka and Sarakka, when a parents wanted to have a boy child or a girl child, they had to hang different things to the cradle. So if they wanted to have a boy, then they would hang like arrow and a bow to the cradle. And if they wanted to have a girl, then it would be feathers or a beak from a snow grouse, which was a sacred bird for Sarakka.
That is really interesting, and it seems quite different to what you see in the mythology of other regions
Yes.
as well.
I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I don't know lots of folk tales about 3 sister goddesses, but I think we can find something similar from fairy tales, like in the story of Sleeping Beauty, there's the 3 fairy godmothers. Then, of course, in Norse mythology, there are the 3 Norns who are goddesses of fate, also in Greek mythology. So maybe there's something behind that.
When I hear about the 3 goddesses that preside over the birth, what I also am thinking of as I'm listening to you talk is that not only are the 3 big capital N Nornir, but also the smaller N Nornir who were said to preside over individual lives. at the birth of each child and at the death of each person. But there's supposed to be Nornir that follow you through your lives. So that also there's something about this interplay between the Nornir and these goddesses that pings something in me, and I don't quite know what that is yet. But I definitely feel you when you talk about the comparisons between all these different goddess figures, possible connections they make. When what I'm hearing too, though, is that the art that you interact with has a material, magical effect, and that it's not just a way of appealing to these goddesses, but it's also a way of the families kind of bringing forward their hopes and dreams for each kid. Is that correct?
Yes.
I find that really beautiful. Can you talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about this art and craft as a form of magic or a form of communication with the divine? Is this like a common thing in Sami folklore, specifically in Sami myth?
Yes, there were lots of almost like an intersectional relationship between the gods and the people. Like when we think about animism, it's believed that everything around you has a spirit, all the stones and the trees, and sort of you are surrounded by invisible spirits. So one of the Sami ritualistic places are called Seitas, which are like giant stone formations, bit like Stonehenge, but not quite. So Seitava could be like a giant stone that looked different to the other stones in the environment. So these would become ritualistic places. There were also tree Seitas, which were like twisted trees that looked a little different than the other trees. And sometimes people would carve faces to these trees. Stone Seitas are way more common than tree Seitas. But these were places where people made sacrifices for the different deities, and these were related to hunting and fishing and reindeer herding most often. Like one would bring reindeer antlers to the reindeer Seita or furs, and then they would ask the Seita to give them luck with the reindeer. And somehow the Seita worked as like a communicator between the man and the deity, or in this case, maybe Horakal is the god of the reindeer. So it's quite interesting, like almost like the Seita could channel things between the god and the goddess and the person worshipping. And I think with the sacrificial gifts for the goddesses that were hanged to the cradle, in a way they are like channeling the god or the goddess when they leave these gifts for them. It's interesting how active this kind of worship was, that how close these relationships were between people and these deities. And certain goddesses, like Beiwe, the sun goddess, I think she's very interesting because during the winter time, when people could not see the sun, some people would get really depressed and sad because it was so dark. And then the other people of the community, they would pray Beiwe, the sun goddess, to look after this depressed person, that they would pull through the winter, and then in the spring the sun would return and things would be fine again. So I like the way they also look after people's mental health, and also connect with the deity or the spirit that way. It's quite nice.
I'm curious, when you were doing this book and since doing this book, for you, has this all been more of a research project, or do you also practice traditional Sami things? Would you consider yourself a pagan?
I consider myself like a bit of a folkloristic pagan. I don't really follow any particular practice, but there are certain deities that I feel very connected with. Like, for example, Sarakka, she's probably my favorite when it comes to the Sami deities and Beiwe. I like her. Then there are certain goddesses from Finnish mythology that I don't necessarily worship them in the same way as some other pagans might, but I do leave offerings sometimes. I really like Mielikki, who is the Finnish goddess of hunt. She was my like first deity that I sort of connected with when I was a teenager. She's the goddess of hunt, and then she's goddess of wounded animals. She's a bit of a contradicting character sometimes, but just really interesting goddess. And there are lots of different deities that are like from different areas of the world. Yes. So I think it's yes and no. I don't like to be too tight with one particular thing because I'm just so interested with too many things.
Yeah. And I know you sort of touched on this earlier and talked about it a bit when we were talking about Frozen. But again, sort of looking in your book where you mention
Yes.
Yabmidaka.
Yeah,
I don't know if I
Midaka.
said that right. Yeah. Yabmidaka. And talk about the Sami traditional views on death and where people go when they die. I was wondering if you could
Yes.
maybe talk about that
So
as well.
Yabmidaka was the goddess of the underworld. It's not much told about her. She's the one who looks after the spirits of passed away people. I do think that originally, long ago, Samis originally believed to reincarnation and that we come back to this earth, maybe as other people or animals or trees. But then at some point, things change a little, and I don't know if maybe it's Christianity or maybe it's some other views of the underworld, where we get this idea of a place where passed away people reside. And in the Sami folk tales, it's usually in the bottom of a bottomless lake, which I think it's really interesting. So in Lapland, lots of the lakes are very deep, and sometimes they have fake bottoms. And a lot of the Samis believed that certain animals could access this bottomless lake very easily. So water birds, they were seen as the messengers between the living and the dead. They could enter the underworld, and they dived into the deep waters. So in both Finnish and in the Sami worldview, world has 3 layers. There's the upper layer, which is the place where the highest gods live. There's the middle world where we live as humans and like together with some nature spirits, animals. Then there is the underworld where the passed away people live and the spirits live. And some Samis believe that world is an island and we are in this, giant sea floating around, and that sea would be space or the universe. But there's been lots of shifts in the way this worldview changed. Like at some point, when Christianity came, the underworld gets more influences from like Christian hell and souls being doomed to suffer, things like that. There's also one story that passed away. People resided in the Northern Lights, which was quite beautiful as well. So there's lots of variation when it comes to the views about the underworld. There was also an interesting concept. I need to check the name of it. Yeah, they're called the Holy People. It's basically like a group of passed away shamans and midwives and healers, and then a shaman, a living shaman. When they wanted to talk with these people, they would shapeshift themselves into an animal and then travel to the underworld to discuss with like a council of shamans if they needed some help with something. Thought that was interesting.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yes.
Oh, so yeah, there's so many points that I'm just like, oh, let's go down this road. Let's go down this road. Guys, I want to pick your brain. There's so many intersection points.
I know, right?
There's I sorry, it's so exciting because I can feel all these connection points as you're talking, and whether you're talking about the world tree and the concept of the upper, middle, lower world, or the nine worlds, uh, the being able to actually sit down and chat with your ancestors and the powerful ancestors in this fashion. Like a lot of this stuff is like, yeah, that tracks. The ancestors in the Northern Lights, I feel like a kinship to the ancestors inside the mountain in certain Nordic legends and myths, where the mountain would open up and your ancestors would be in a hall wanting to talk with you, that kind of thing. A lot of this, it's not one to one, but a lot of this does speak to me in different fashion. And I find that so very cool. Just so fun. Um, Especially when we're talking about all these different places where it's definitely different mythology, right? It
Mm.
But there's this there's to me and there's this feeling of like cousins or kinship there. I don't know quite how to put it, because sometimes
There was
like
a,
when you hear
yeah,
these stories, words fail, right?
there was a Finnish folklorist called Anna-Lena Siikala. She passed away a couple of years ago, and she talked about these different. I think she called them mythms. Like these are like patterns that appear across the world that are similar within mythology and folk tales that we can find from different cultures, and they are not related to one another, the cultures, just that people create the same creature or they believed the same invisible spirit. So I definitely do see that a lot when I do my research. I think the character that I come across from every single culture that I have ever studied when it comes to folklore is the nightmare. It's the person creature that presses person's chest when they are sleeping. I found that same creature from Middle East, Native American myths, from Africa, Egypt, Finland, Sami, Norse. It's every country, every culture.
Huh.
Yeah,
Are there anything that are specific to like the Sami or Finnish way of understanding the nightmare that are like, oh, this is distinctly a Sami or Finnish thing versus this is an Egyptian or an Islamic way of relating to this phenomena?
I think it's pretty similar across cultures. I think what's interesting about the Finnish and the Sami is this idea that people had um, two or three different souls.
Hmm.
Quite like this concept. So we have a soul, that's our modern idea of a soul, but then we also have a body soul. And the body soul is the functions of the body, it's the breathing and sweating, stuff like that. So the Finns and the Sami believed that during the night, these, not the body soul, but the soul could leave the person and travel around in the forest wherever during the night and do what it wanted, and then in the morning return to the body. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Then in Finland, we do have this belief that when a person died, their soul could leave the body as a butterfly or as a little bird. So that's a thing. Hmm. So there are lots of stories about the soul. With the Sami, they believe that the skeleton was very much connected with the soul. So if a person found like a dead reindeer from the forest, they had to put the whole skeleton together when they buried it, because if there was even one bone missing, the reindeer could not reincarnate. It would get stuck somewhere in the middle to the void. So everything had to be skeleton had to be put together and buried, and then the animal could move on to the next phase. And there was the same in Finland. They did the same with the bears. They found a bear that if it had one bone missing or bones missing, then I don't remember what they did with it. Maybe they took someone else's bones there or made bones from twigs or something so that the bear could reincarnate, return to the universe again. I thought that was interesting. So there was something magical about the bones as well. So the bones were quite important.
That also reminds me of what you wrote about the
Yes.
Nostokarhu in your book. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that, because that's also kind of really
So
interesting.
yes, that's like another concept that one can find from like different Arctic cultures. So it's basically a bear that a shaman or a witch could raise from the dead, and then this shaman or evil witch, they could use that, control that bear to attack, someone else's cattle or the enemy. So it's a bit like a zombie bear then. Yeah, there are stories like that from Finland. And in Lapland, they also had stories about the bears. So people could transform into bears. These are these stories can be found like right from the top of Finland. We don't have lots of like werewolf myths in Finland. They're pretty rare, but these bears exist. It's quite interesting. But
Yeah, I think I found the section in your book where you're talking
mm,
about the Nostokarhu and the Kultasami. And there was the story of, is it a lap girl in Kurtako?
yes.
It says that there was a bear that was bewitched that would not have harmed anybody, but they found a belt behind the fur and they believed the belt
Mm,
used to be a man. Yeah, it's really cool and interesting. And then underneath that, you've got sort of talking about wolves similarly.
Yes.
I suppose thinking about it, lots of our pagan audience, often as sort of English speaking in the UK and the US and Canada, often hear about the Sami, if they're pagans, because of researching Norse history and Norse culture as kind of the next door neighbors. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about where things are very different between Finnish and Sami culture and folklore and mythology as compared to the Norse.
So, with the Norse, I think there are certain similarities. Like we can find the thunder god, we can find god of the sun goddess. I think in Finland we have more like elemental beliefs than in Norse mythology. Like with Finnish mythology, there's a very strong emphasis on the four elements. There's the water, air, earth, and fire, and then there are then major deities. The most worshipped deities are connected to these different elements. Then also there's the god of thunder, who was very much worshipped because he was the god of fertility, you know. And I don't think Finnish deities are as warmongering as some of the Norse deities. So maybe the culture, what I've studied, was very peaceful. Same with the Sami. There's not really deities that are related with war, or very little. There's not much mentions of that. And I think Finnish mythology does have lots of influences from Baltic cultures, especially when it comes to like farming deities, because I think those originally came from like Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, or at least they were influenced by those cultures. So the elemental aspect is very common in Finnish mythology. And we have this concept called väki, which is really, really cool. So the väki is it's the force or the power of things. It's like force in Star Wars, or mana or chi. So all the elements had their own väki, and men had their own väki, women had their own väki. So it's like the energy that's related to different concepts and things. And when a magician or a witch would work with energy, they would work with the different väki. And yes, I think that's the main difference: the elemental worship and the väki, which is very much an animistic concept. And there's also emu in Finnish mythology. In Sami mythology, they call it maddu. So this is like a creature that's the ancestor of a species, or ancestor of different animals, ancestor of trees. And this is usually like the oldest or the biggest animal that you can come across. Like an oldest fish in the lake would be the emu, the creator, ancestor of all the fish in the lake. So that's something that I think is also quite animistic, but pretty common in Finnish folklore. And we don't have like sagas in the same way that there's in Norse myths. We do have poems and songs, and sorry, I don't have my song collection here with me, but lots of the Finnish like poems and songs, they are really old spells, and there are different types of spells. There are spells that are about the animals, that are related to hunting and fishing, but also there's a section of spells that you use when an animal bites you, or you get I don't know, chased by an animal. And then a lot of these spells tell the origin of an animal species. For example, if a snake would bite a person, you would sing the words of the snake, and the words of the snake tell the origin of the snake. there's certain consistency in these stories. Like one of my favorite stories is the Bird of the Cat in Finnish folktales. The cat was created in a sauna, and it was created by an elf, a greybeard, and it took pieces or elements of different animals and it put them to the stove in the sauna. I took a girl's nose, uh, a mouse's tail to whiskers, and a snake became a cat's tail, and cat has a body of a wolf. And the elf puts all these ingredients to the sauna, the stove, and from the steam comes the first cats. So the elf is the emo of the cats, the creator. I love that story. But then there's another one about the raven. It's hilarious. I don't remember if it's a raven or a crow, but the raven is born in a pile of coal in a hill where there are like all kinds of ingredients that witches uses. There are spindles and cauldrons, black cauldrons. Everything is black, and from those things the ravens are born. So we have things like that in Finnish mythology.
That's really cool.
Mm,
I love that the sauna is
I
this
love it.
this primal place of creation and healing and everything.
Mm,
The the elves making a composite animal into the cat. It
mm,
tracks with my experience with cats.
yes, all of my cats have enjoyed being in the sauna.
It's cool.
Mm,
What is the this might be uh, a little more personal, but I'm curious. Like, what is as you explore these folklore and you share these folklore to the world, um, what is the number one thing you hope people come away with when they're finished reading these myths and these legends and they've closed the book for a while?
I guess I hope there's some kind of enlightenment there that, wow, these are really cool stories. And then there is some appreciation for these folk tales and myths. They are not as well known, so it's nice that uh, people enjoy them and we can preserve them. And yes, I think when it's not as well known uh, history, even in Finland, I think most people who are not into mythology and folklore and spiritualism may not know the history of like pre-Christian Finland. They might know the history of Christian Finland, not the pre-Christian Finland. Um, I have seen maybe within last 20 years, there's been rise in both neo-paganism, but also like interest in general towards Finnish mythology among Finns. So that's nice. Like currently in Finland, we have couple, I think at least one, like a official religion where it's basically traditional Finnish pagan beliefs. I don't know enough to talk about, but I know there's at least one or two groups where it's an official religion. I think they call it Finn belief or something like that, where they basically worship all the old Finnish gods. But just beside pagans, I think there is increased interest towards Finnish mythology in Finland, and maybe later on also abroad.
Well, I'm sure your book will
We'll
definitely
see.
help there. Mm. Um, was there anything else that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to talk about?
Oh, let's see my notes. Yes, I think it was quite interesting in the Frozen films, beside the mythical horse. So there's this idea, I think, with the water, when the Samis believed that the world of passed away people is somewhere beyond water, or it's underwater. I often think that water as an element is very fitting to all these idea of spirituality, passed away people, because some people believe that water holds memories. So I thought that was quite an interesting concept in the film, and also this idea in the Sami mythology that the word of the passed away people is somewhere in the bottom of a bottomless lake. So in Lapland, when a shaman fell into a trance, there was this sort of a metaphor that when they traveled between these different layers of the world, some believe that they traveled through the trunk of the world tree to visit the, passed away people, or these holy men and holy women. I thought that was an interesting concept in the mythology, how much water is related to that idea of the underworld. I wonder, I think a lot of these lakes were holy back in the days. People believed that there were spirits living inside them. So there was certain magic in the environment people were drawn to. And this is from Finnish folklore. There was this concept. We have a goddess of water. Vellamos is the goddess of the sea, and so on. But her first form was a shamanistic goddess, Vedenema. She's the goddess of all waters. And I just think it's interesting how these things are intertwined. The worship of water, and then this connection with the ancestors and the underworld. But I think there's a lot of I talked about the water birds, how they dive to the water and then they deliver messages to the ancestors. One of those reasons why water birds were so sacred was because when people saw a swan diving to the water and it could hold its breath such a long time, people believed that it had magical powers, magical properties. It's the same reason why people worshipped bears back in the days, because bear went to hibernation and people thought that bear died, but then in the spring the bear woke up, so bear conquered death, which means that bear must be magical and maybe a god. So there is certain logic behind all these animal worship stories. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it is interesting seeing how all these things connect and intertwine with the environment around them, and how it's in the folklore and the environment is in the folklore, and you see the folklore in the environment. So yeah. I want to thank you for talking with us. We'll make sure that we have a link to your book in the episode
Thank
description
you. This was a lot of fun.
for people to buy it. Oh, thank you. If people want to find you, where
Oh,
can
my
they go?
Instagram handle is Fairychamber Art, and then my website is fairychamber.com. People can find me there. My YouTube channel has been on
Awesome.
hiatus for writing reasons, but I'm pretty active on Instagram if somebody wants to chat. Cool.
Cool. Kitos.
Kiitos.
All right. Emily, where can people find your stuff?
Drinking.wordpress.com.
And you, Snow?
My stuff is at linktree/snowthegoth.
You can find my work at saranth.wordpress.com. You can also find my work on patreon.com/saranthodinson. You can also find my Substack, saranth.substack.com. If you wish to support me on patreon.com, I write topics and prayers. You can also find me on Three Pagans on Tap, where we go over drinks and talk about polytheism, animism, magic, and spirituality. And if you want to support the show, please, by all means, find us on social media, repost the show. Please, if you can find all the little 5-star reviews, and that would deeply help the show out wherever you can. You can find us on patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire if you want to support the show, but you do not need to be a member of the Patreon in order to be a member of the Discord. So please come on in, the waters are fine, and come warm yourself around the fire. I want to thank all of our listeners, all of our supporters, and all of you for joining us, listeners. And I want to thank you, Niina, so much for so much of your time and sharing so much with us tonight.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time around the fire.